So I'm responsible for our cloud, channels, and community team. Of course, when I bring that to a customer, they kind of look at me funny and like, what in the world is all of that? So to kind of simplify it, I'm responsible for bringing our emerging technologies to market, cloud services, the new edge data store you're going to hear about later today. I'm also responsible for our emerging business models. When we're working with equipment manufacturers or automation companies that want to embed our technology, as well as our new channel sales program. And last but not least, I'm responsible for our entire partner community. So in the day in the life of me, half of my time is spent generally working with technology partners, everything from the large cloud platforms down to the small independent startups that are doing next generation type analytics. The other half of my time is spent interacting with customers around how they can bring these new technologies into their critical operational environments. So I guess you could say that half of my time I get to talk about the promise of where technology is going, but the other half of my time we talk about the reality of where technology is in critical operations and how do you bring those worlds together. And because of my role, I often get asked, what makes OSIsoft different? Of course, there's tons of time series databases on the market today. It sounds like a new one's getting released every week. There's open source, the cloud platforms have theirs. What makes OSIsoft unique? Well, of course, our uniqueness is grounded in your uniqueness. Our DNA is built off the DNA of our customers. And the transformations that go on in critical operations, and I'll say that have been going on in critical operations, is quite different than transformations in other industries. And the best way to give an example of this, of course, is always through the stories of our customers. 2010, 30-inch gas pipeline erupts 6 p.m. in a neighborhood. Flames reached as high as 1,000 feet. At first, newscasts thought it was an airplane crash or it was an earthquake. An hour and a half before, somebody in operations with little to no information, but just intuition and experience, was able to identify where the gas supply was coming from and turn it off. Highly publicized, of course, highly tragic incident. But what wasn't well publicized is what happened 5 years later. This company went through a transformation. Same-size gas pipeline erupts because a piece of equipment hits it. But this time, in minutes, somebody in operations with the experience was able to identify where the supply was coming from and was able to turn it off. The difference, of course, had nothing to do with the people and their ability. The difference had to be with those who had data and those who didn't. And this belief in that if you give data to the people with the right experience and understanding of their operations, great transformations can happen, has been the foundation of this company since its inception. But I don't know if everybody knows that OSIsoft actually didn't start as a software company. We actually started as a services company. Dr. Pat Kennedy, PhD, chemical engineer, patents in advanced process control, he actually sought out to share his expertise with customers. He was going to go share the expertise he had to go help them optimize his operations. But he started to realize something. Every time he'd meet with a customer, he'd show this little piece of software that he had to develop because he needed data, and their attention would always turn from his services to the data. And he had a realization. He realized the real value he could bring to the world wasn't in sharing his expertise, but it was providing software that would allow those in operations to leverage their own expertise by giving them data. And it started by connecting to a single asset, so companies could run their assets better. But of course, assets don't operate in a silo. They're part of a plant. So the infrastructure evolved so companies could run their processes better. But of course, plants don't operate in a silo either. They're part of a business. And so the infrastructure evolved so companies could run their businesses better. And this has been going on for decades. But of course, there is new technology. There's things that are going on a smaller footprint. The rise of IoT, gateways, new sensing technology, making data accessible that maybe wasn't cost effective in the past. And we also recognize that companies are not acting alone either. They're part of value chains, they have partners, and so this need to actually be able to exchange data is now starting to rise. So there's this need for this infrastructure from sensor to community, and this is what we have been working on over the last few years. But this infrastructure isn't just any infrastructure. Of course, it's infrastructure that's purpose-built for critical operations. As Norton mentioned, of course, downtime can equal life loss or major financial impact. But the pundits say the world is changing. AI, machine learning, data science, Industry 4.0, IoT, no question it's exciting. And in fact, many of your leadership thinks it's exciting too. Well, at least those that attended our executive forum last year on artificial intelligence, we actually sent out a survey to them, same survey that was sent out by MIT to thousands of executives, to ask them what was their perception of artificial intelligence. Did they believe that it was important to actually harness this new technology? 85%, both from the MIT study, as well as from the surveys we sent to customers, said it was important or very important to harness this new technology. Of course, here's the daunting part. Only 8% felt like they actually had the know-how to take advantage of it. Where do you start? Do you insource it? Do you outsource it? Do you use open source technology? Do you partner with a vendor? And what does all the terminology even really mean? I was talking to an analyst recently, a few months ago, and we were talking about IoT. And she started to ask me questions around our customers' use of IoT, and is it starting to actually have a big impact on their world? So of course, first I asked her to define it, IoT, and I started asking a few questions. I said, do you mean the new small sensing that's now enabled, that we're seeing that's coming up, thanks to the consumer world? She said, absolutely, that's part of IoT. What about traditional automation and control? Yep, that's got sensors, that's IoT. What about the actual applications that use the data? The machine learning, the data science, all of those yep, that's all IoT. And so I quickly realized that our definitions of IoT were completely different. So it actually meant nothing to have that conversation. It was really difficult for me to have that conversation with her, because I could have taken it a number of different ways. When we think about IoT at OSIsoft, we think about the new stuff, because we understand that things that were built for the control network are very different than things that have come up from the IT side on the IoT from the consumer side. But we do recognize that this new technology can provide interesting insights. In fact, we've even invested in an open source project called FogLamp, specifically to help try to make that process easier of integrating those new technologies. But when I talk to customers about this and I ask them, what do you think about this new technology? How much of this are you actually going to bring in? I was talking to one of our largest oil and gas customers, and it was the GM. And they had actually a big press release about their investment in IoT and their investment in digitization. And I asked them, over the next 5 years, how much do you actually see coming from this new secondary sensing network? His answer surprised me. He said, 10, maybe 15%. Of course, I asked him why. Obviously, you can get much more data. It's much more cost effective. Why wouldn't you get more? He says, well, I got two issues. The first one is, I have to have someone to look at the data. And I don't have a lot of free operations people waiting to look at new data. Of course, I'll invest where it makes sense. But the bigger reason is because I actually have so much data that we're actually not taking advantage of. And I want to make sure we optimize what we have before we actually start bringing in more data sets to our environment. Which takes us to the next real big mega trend, and the one that, quite frankly, most of my conversations end up becoming about. And that's data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. In fact, we have 2 presentations this week. Mondi and Lonza are going to speak about their success integrating these technologies. No question, super exciting. We've actually seen a lot of customers get a lot of value from leveraging data science. But we have realized one thing. There is no magic box. You don't just throw data up into one big place and throw some algorithms on it and hope that it's going to give you insights for operations. You know, it's funny, I brought this slide up. I use it a lot when I do executive briefings with Norton. And there was one particular, I was sitting, I think it was a chemical company. I'm sitting across the table, and the gentleman starts to chuckle. And I said, why are you laughing? And he says, you know, it's funny. We had a consultant come in here and told us, we have the brightest data scientists. We hire the best. If you give us your data, we're going to answer questions you didn't even know to ask. Problems you didn't even know were there. So, of course, they brought him on, brought him into a project. 3 months later, kicked him out. He asked the operations team, what happened? He says, we can't take time teaching these guys engineering. They don't know the difference between a pump and a heat exchanger. And so they quickly realized that you can't just throw data into an environment with somebody who has no understanding of the actual problem or the operations and hope that it's going to actually give you great value. You have to be able to leverage the expertise that's in operations. If you can do that and get that working with this new technology, and most importantly, if you can get those insights back to the operations team so that they trust them and they actually act on them, no question, you'll get great value. But it takes us to another challenge. Of course, your company doesn't look like this. It looks more like this. Your people in operations, of course, vastly outnumber those in IT, and they vastly outnumber probably the partners that you can bring in to work with. And of course, they have day jobs. I mean, of course they want to do innovation, but the plant isn't always a perfect situation. They have to make sure things continue to run. And sometimes their operations can actually look like this. I was talking to James. James runs a processing plant. I've known James for years. He's actually taught me a ton. He's one of those quintessential operational experts. Could tell you everything from the front end to the back end of the process. And he's taught me so much. And we were having a conversation around this new technology. I said, what do you think about AI, and machine learning, and all these new IoT? He says, it sounds great. I mean, anything that'll help improve operations, safety, efficiency, reliability, of course, we want to embrace. But that's not what I think about every day. I think about the fragile componentry that underpins my operations. He says, my operations is fueled by a power plant that was built in the 1960s. I feel like I'm on an island, and I can't rely on anybody outside of my island if something were to go wrong. And you know, James' concerns seem to be growing in relevancy. 2019 Economic Forum Global Risk Report came out. Of the 5 top global risks for 2019, 3 are environmental related. The other 2, data security. 10 years ago, the environment wasn't even on the list. So I think we recognize that the world around us is changing. Obviously, we have horrific things that have happened, like Dorian, which just devastated the Caribbean, a place where my dear friend and your host today actually grew up, Norton Green. But what about other byproducts of this? Something that's maybe not so catastrophic, something as simple as algae. It's happening here. It happened recently over in the UK. But what if these algae blooms actually impacted your entire water supply? This happened to our customer, the city of Salem. I was talking to Devin. He presented on this recently at one of our Pi Worlds. And he's actually engaged with us talking about getting on the Lighthouse program for cloud services. And we started talking about his use case and why he was looking at cloud services. And he brought me back to an event, May 2018. Algae blooms started reaching high levels in their water supply. The cyanotoxins, which is a byproduct of that process, reached levels that the Environmental Protection Agency deemed as potentially unhealthy. Of course, it's complicated because it's actually not regulated, at least not in the US. And so when and how you share information is really up to the city. Now, of course, those that worked in the city, their service to the community, they live in that community. They want to make sure that they're giving the right information to their residents. And so they decided to let them know. And they told them that if you are elderly, pregnant, you shouldn't be consuming the water. Of course, you all could probably guess what happened next. By the end of the day, not one store in the whole city had any water left. Everything was sold out. Mass panic ensued. For the next 2 months, the entire city of Salem actually shut down. They had to man watering stations. It didn't matter if you were in finance, if you were in operations. Everybody reacted to go support their community. Now, of course, the city of Salem is going to do a number of things to try to prepare for this changing dynamic that's happening in their world. One of which is doing new types of treatment, another of which is looking to partners to help provide better predictions on doing these algae blooms. But the one thing that I thought was really interesting was that they actually now want to make the data from these new sensors actually be available to their entire resident community. Because, of course, once they put that first notice out, you can imagine how many phone calls they got, how many inquiries they had. And so now they want to provide seamless visibility, which is just one small example of a small municipality who's in critical operations that requires an infrastructure that's purpose-built from sensors all the way out to the community. One, of course, that can bring in this new sensing technology that can connect to the legacy systems, that has the ability to share data outside, but most importantly, that can get access to people, experts who understand the problems and actually can start to take action on solving them. You know, there's a lot of talk these days around artificial intelligence. I don't know if many of you watched the Jack Ma and Elon Musk recent debate around AI taking over the world. But I was listening to an MIT professor on artificial intelligence recently, and he made a couple of really interesting points. The first one was he believed in the future, collections of people with AI will be much more powerful than AI or people alone, in the same way of collections of people are much more powerful than any individual alone. The other interesting thing that he mentioned was he started talking about what's going to differentiate companies in the future. Is it going to be technology, how they implement that technology? His answer resonated obviously quite well with me. His answer was it would be the people and their data. And he used Google as his example. He says, look at Google. They open source TensorFlow, their deep neural net technology, which supports machine learning and data science type applications. But what aren't they going to give you access to? Good luck getting Google to give you access to their data. And they're sure not going to give you access to their people. And it's been this belief that people with data can transform their world. That's been the belief of OSIsoft from the very beginning. That story I talked about Pat realizing this 39 years ago, and it was quite interesting that even those who are looking into the future see it actually becoming even more relevant than it has in the past. But of course, for us, these people aren't just any people. These are people who are the foundation, operating the foundation of our entire economy. These are people in critical operations, experts, all of you, many of you, who actually are able to understand the problems that hit those environments. Because it's these people, when powered with the right operational data, that have the ability to not only transform their world, it will be the key to transforming our greater world. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you coming to the conference. I look forward to interacting with all of you this week.